Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
This World Environment Day, we're asking everyone to join the global movement to restore our lands, to build drought resilience, and to combat desertification. Because land degradation and desertification affect over 3 billion people. Freshwater ecosystem are also degraded, making it harder to grow crops and to raise livestock. This disproportionately affects smallholder farmers and, of course, the rural poor. But nature is resilient. By restoring ecosystem, we can slow the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, including desertification, and of course, the crisis of pollution and waste. We can help to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework.
That was Inga Anderson, Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme, as we celebrate World Environment Day today on the 5th of June 2024. This year's theme is land restoration, desertification and drought resilience. And for this episode of Eco Money, I want to keep the spotlight on renewables. In fact, to talk about hydro, since drought resilience is one of the themes for this year's Environment Day. I want to look at how hydro is evolving to become smaller, more compact, and its growth as countries across the globe race to net zero targets. To help us get a better understanding of hydro here in Asia, we're joined now by Brian Selby, Regional General Manager Asia, China and India at GE Renewable Energy Hydro Solutions, GE Vernova. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you.
I was just taking a look at some stats, and I believe in 2023, around 84% of new global electricity capacity was solar and wind power, with other technologies, coal, gas, nuclear, hydropower, and renewables constituting the remaining 16%. And I know, Brian, that you cover Asia, China, India, renewable energy hydro solutions for GE Vernova. And hydro, often we talk about solar on the show when we're talking about renewables. So I'd really love to find out more from you in terms of what is happening with hydro in the region. So I'm going to start off by asking you this. Obviously, the renewable energy landscape in Asia is changing. What do you expect to be the dominant play when it comes to the renewable energy mix? That's the first part. And the second part is, how do you see hydro's slice of the pie growing?
The adoption of wind and solar is only going to grow exponentially. That's going to be driven by a number of different factors, not only the dialing down of traditional conventional fossil fuel investments, but also the need and expansion by various industries. Just take software and data centers, for example, and the massive growth of energy requirements for that industry sector throughout Asia Pacific. So the amount of adoption of wind and solar is only going to just grow like topsy. So if you think about it, where does hydro fit into that? So hydro, it's traditionally been what they call run of river. So you see a dam, it's blocking the traditional path of water coming downstream. It enters into the turbine. It turns the turbine. It generates electricity, and then it exits downstream out of the dam. Now, that type of growth in traditional hydro is really changing significantly in favor of a very different type of use case for hydro, which is called pump hydro storage. And the reason for that is if you create a pump hydro storage system, which is basically a large battery, you have an upper reservoir, you have a lower reservoir. When you need electricity, you release water from the upper reservoir. It runs down through the turbines, spins up, generates electricity, and then exits into the lower reservoir. Then you reverse the turbine, you pump the water back up into the upper reservoir, repeat over and over and over again. So it is a closed loop system, which is perfectly aligned with this massive adoption of solar and wind. Why is that? Because not all of the time the grid can absorb the power that's coming from solar and wind farms. All right. So, what do you do with that capability? What do you do with those electrons? Well, you can power the pump mode, if you will, of moving the water from the lower reservoir up to the upper reservoir. And then when you need the electricity, you turn the tap, the water runs down again. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So you're not wasting electricity at all. You're maximizing the use by the solar investments, by the wind investment, to ensure that you're having constant 24/7 clean, renewable energy providing into the grid at all times. So that is the basic use case. The other use case for hydro, for example, again, to support the adoption of wind and solar, is when you have variability. So suddenly, the cloud cover comes in, the wind drops down, and the electrons going into the grid likes solid electrons coming in. They don't like variability. So the pump storage you can turn on within 90 seconds. You can have consistent power coming back into the grid and remove down that variability that's being shot into the grid. So those are the big places that everything comes together.
Speaking of variability, Brian, how is climate change impacting the way that hydro facilities are being put together? I know you've mentioned there's a shift from, traditional dams like the Three Gorges Dam that we've got in China to these more, perhaps, would you call them compact,
discrete hydro plant? Yes.
How are these changing weather patterns impacting hydro, and how do you come in to help support when it comes to technology to tackle the issue with climate change impacting renewable energy technologies such as hydro?
Right. Climate change obviously impacting every single power technology out there. That's for sure. For hydro specific, we are doing a couple of different things for traditional hydro. One is we're helping to implement a lot of new digital overlays so that owner-operators of hydro plants can have a better understanding about weather conditions, and in order to adjust their outputs from their reservoirs or from the free-flowing river as it comes down. The second piece is that GE has invested a lot of R&D work in upgrading our hydro technology so that we increase the efficiencies of old plants. So, the great thing about a hydro plant is that it is a technology that will last 40, 50 years. So you can go without a major overhaul on a hydro plant for about 10 or 15 years. And then, you kind of can go for an upgrade. And when we come in to go for an upgrade with customers, we do things like install new control systems, increase the efficiency of the turbines, increase the efficiency of the generators. So in that way, for these very traditional hydro plants, we're trying to increase their capability to add that flexibility that they need for the conditions you just talked about.
That's great. And so, Brian, where do you see the biggest growth in the region when it comes to hydro?
Well, right now, it's China.
Mm-hmm.
And because China has decided that they are all in with the energy transition, right? And so they've massively adopted the wind and solar as being their prime development areas, also nuclear as well. But for hydro, they're focused then on pump storage. And so pump storage, they are adding roughly about each year about 10 pump storage plants. Over the next 10 years, by 2035, they will add 280 gigawatts of pump storage projects operating. Right now, the next closest is India. They're looking over the next 10 years to do roughly 30 gigawatts. Australia and New Zealand's looking to do about 10 gigawatts. And then Southeast Asia is probably going to do over the next 10 years roughly about 6 to 8, depending upon whether or not some projects get off the ground. So it gives you a massive idea about how China has basically said, we're all in wind and solar, and pump storage hydro is our way. We're going to ensure that this massive investment in wind and solar is actually successful in helping us to reach net zero.
You mentioned earlier the efficiency of hydro when
Yes.
you're talking about pump and storage. Could you talk to us about the cost to run hydro versus other renewables, or perhaps the investment and ROI side of it?
So this, and this is not me saying it, this is from people like the IEA, and all. They have said hydro is the cheapest form of power in the world, bar none. And the reason for that is because of the longevity of the asset class, right? Mm-hmm. So solar and wind on a per kilowatt basis is low. However, they only last, maybe they'll push 12 to 15 years before you have to go through and renew. Hydro, we're talking 50 to 100 years. We've got hydro plants in Asia that are 80 years old, still producing power. So when you make a big investment up front on the civil work side, the concrete dams, the upper lower reservoirs, things like that. But when you do the ROI calculation over a 50-year period, it's a nit compared to anything else.
How do you see hydro's slice of the pie growing? Say, not now, but perhaps in 20 years' time, closer towards that 2050 net zero target?
I view this as in really the next boom in hydro is over the next 10 years. Simply because you cannot successfully implement the type of investment required in solar and wind without a equally strong investment in pump storage. It just doesn't work because there's too much curtailment. There's too much wastage of, the electrons coming off of solar and wind just because of demand requirements and variability into the grid and all these sorts of things. So there is no other technology that you can put out there that will provide a gigawatt plus of storage in one location and last 50 plus years out there today. So the adoption rate has to equal the type of growth that you are looking at for solar and wind.
So, Brian, we're talking about renewable energies. It's World Environment Day.
Yep.
Perhaps, do you want to share with me some initiatives that GE Vernova is working on at the moment when it comes to, other than renewables, sustainability or conservation? Anything that you'd like to share?
So I think, look, we're doing a number of different things. Obviously, we're committed to sustainability and to growth of new technologies in the sustainable area, and we're spending massive sums of money in the R&D field across all of our 12 GE Vernova portfolio businesses specific to that area. However, we're also involved in conservation as well as our own growth, if you will, thought leadership, if you will, engagement with community, engagement with our teams. So for those two elements, that's where I'll take hydro specific. We've done some very, very key things that are both a combination of focused on our business, but then also focused on developing our community, which includes all of our partners who work with us every single day. A couple of key ones. So you mentioned earlier, we've got a manufacturing plant up in China for GE Hydro. Over the last couple of years, we've been doing things like implementing new processes, such as higher waste control, for water waste that eliminates the amount of waste in the water, that heavy metals and things like that have to be taken and landfilled by over 90+%. So we've invested in these kind of technologies. We've installed solar panels on our rooftop, and we've got a huge rooftop plant in our plant there, and that's roughly about 6 kilowatts of power that we sell back to the grid, and we're doing the same thing in our operation in India. So those are very, very specific operational activities that we view as smart business decisions, because not only is it good for the environment, but it's also good for the operating plant. It lowers down our cost of operations. It's cleaner. It's safer for our workers, and it drives a behavior that says this is how we operate in order to adopt greater sustainable activity that has a very positive business outcome.
Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me.
We've been speaking with Brian Selby, Regional General Manager, Asia, China and India, GE Renewable Energy Hydro Solutions at GE Veranova. He's been sharing with us about the evolution of hydro and hydro's increasing share of the renewable energy pie. You've been listening to Eco Money on Money FM 89.3 with me, Rachel Kelly. I'll be back with you next week with more eco news and views. Wishing you a wonderful World Environment Day.